Hey, good morning, everyone. Today I'll be providing an in depth overview of Germany's climate profile, including Germany's unprecedented energy transition, or Energiewende. Germany is a compelling case study because it is one of the globe's most ambitious attempts to move away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy while still being economically competitive. This presentation will take into account Germany's current energy mix, historical emissions trends, climate commitments, and challenges and opportunities ahead. Germany is one of particular interest since it phased out nuclear power voluntarily while simultaneously attempting to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, creating special policy contradictions and innovative solutions with which the rest of the world is watching with great interest. The presentation has taken into account the 8 most significant questions provided in our assignment framework. Germany yields very rich material because it is both Europe's largest economy and its most ambitious climate policy pioneer. The country's policy involves complex balancing acts between economic competitiveness, energy security, and environmental aims. We will examine how Germany reconciles its competing priorities while being an industrial power. The study is founded on recent data showing that Germany achieved all-time renewable energy penetration rates in 2020, but it still struggles in transport and heating sectors. Each dimension that we consider illustrates both potential and constraint of rapid decarbonization in advanced economics. Germany made history in 2024 when 62.7% of net public electricity was provided by renewables, according to the headline-grabbing Fraunhofer Institute for Solar Energy Systems. This is a stinging pickup from 56% in 2023, indicating how quickly Germany's energy transition is unfolding. Wind energy has been the backbone of this change, providing approximately 27% of overall electricity usage, and solar energy outperformed government growth targets to reach 14%. The fall in the consumption of fossil fuels is equally dramatic. Electricity produced from coal fell to 95.3 TWh, its lowest output since 1957. This achievement is even more dramatic considering that Germany simultaneously sealed its nuclear phase-out in April 2023, removing what had long been a leading low-carbon source of electricity. The statistics show that expansion in renewables has more than compensated for the loss of nuclear electricity. Historical trends in emissions. The trend in Germany's emissions is one of the great improvement with persistent problems. Greenhouse gas emissions in 2024 were 656 million tons CO2 equivalent, down by 18 million tons on 2023 and within the nation's threshold under the Climate Action Law. The electricity sector has been the headline grabber, CO2 output falling to 152 million tons, a staggering 58% less than in 1990. Germany as a whole has reduced its greenhouse gas emissions by approximately 46% since 1990, and is among the highest performing countries in the European Union in absolute terms. The improvement has not been uniform across sectors. However, although electricity production has evolved significantly, transport and buildings have been challenging sectors where cuts have fallen behind. Such one-sided progress demonstrates the decarbonization challenge of the whole economy and the need for sectoral policies. All right, economic integration of emissions. The emissions trend of Germany reflects that of being the industrial giant of Europe and the world's fourth largest economy. The country's carbon-intensive industrial sectors, steel, chemicals, and automotive production, are sources of significant emissions, but also economy-boosting drivers. Dependent on 47% of GDP through exports, Germany also has the delicate responsibility of being industry competitive while its emissions reduce. 23% of unemployment is in manufacturing, of employment. Sorry, the highest proportion in the EU. So industrial decarbonization is an economic and political issue. German policymakers are constantly balancing stringent climate policies and fear of carbon leakage, the danger that stringent regulation would lead to production being moved to countries with weaker climate policies, potentially increasing overall emissions while hunting the domestic economy. But Germany has also seized this challenge as an opportunity, emerging as a global leader for the export of green technology worth $47 billion annually, demonstrating the promise of climate action for creating new economic opportunities. Future energy and economic projections. Germany's long-term energy projections are aggressive and detailed, reflecting widespread planning for the move towards 2045 climate neutrality. 80% renewable electricity by 2030 and nearly 100% by 2035 are the government's aspirations, requiring tremendous infrastructure outlays as well as grid upgrading. The core of these strategies is the establishment of a green hydrogen economy, with $9 billion spent on hydrogen infrastructure by 2030 that positions Germany as a competitive European hydrogen hub. Transport electrification is also ambitious to have 15 million electric vehicles by 2030, 10 times the current figure of 1.4 million. Heating sector transformation entails the installation of 6 million heat pumps by 2030 that can replace fossil fuel-based heating equipment. Remarkably, these projections are based on consistent economic growth of 1.2 to 1.8% annually, demonstrating the government's commitment that economic prosperity and decarbonization need not to be mutually exclusive. Unprecedented sectoral cooperation and consistent political will over a number of electoral cycles are, however, required to achieve these objectives. Germany's climate commitments. Germany boasts one of the world's most comprehensive and legally binding systems of climate commitments. The focal point is the national ambition of climate neutrality by 2045, a full 5 years ahead of the EU target of 2050. This commitment is supported by intermediary targets, including a cut of greenhouse gas emissions by 65% by 2030 compared with 1999 levels. Germany's ambitions exceed its EU commitment and bolster the bloc's shared 2030 55% reduction target. The plans are premised on the 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature goal of the Paris Agreement, in accordance with the scientific consensus regarding action needed to be taken. Crucially, these plans are not merely ambitions. They're enshrined into law via the Climate Action Law, which establishes annual emission caps for different sectors of the economy and requires government action in the event of targets being broken. This legal framework provides accountability and policy certainty, even though recent reforms have increased flexibility in reaching sectoral targets without altering total national limits. Investment in infrastructure development requirements. The scale of investment required to execute the climate transformation of Germany is huge, with forecast as much as 500 billion euros by 2030. Grid modernization alone will take 40 billion euros to deal with increased renewable electricity and sector coupling in power, heat, and transport. Decarbonizing industry is the most challenging, and around 200 billion euros will be required to transform energy-intensive sectors like steel, cement, and chemicals through hydrogen consumption and process technology innovation. The building sector will take 180 billion euros for widespread energy rehabilitation, and the installation of heat pumps will replace fossil fuel heating. Transport infrastructure investment entails 80 billion euros for inclusive EV charging networks and rail electrification. They're both challenging and they're both a challenge and opportunity. The initial outlay is gigantic, but they're anticipated to yield great economic returns via job creation, technology exports, and less dependence on energy imports. The question is how to finance it in both public and private spaces while upholding fiscal prudence. Political and social challenges. Germany's energy transition is in for a rough political and social trial despite the broad public support for climate action. Even if 85% of Germans accept in principle climate protection policies, cost uncertainty, energy security concerns, and predictability create political tensions. Regional regional inhomogeneities are particularly difficult to manage, with regions like Lusatia and Rhineland facing economic dislocation when mines and power plants close, requiring massive just transition schemes. Some sectors of industry continue to demand more phased transition timetables on the basis that rapid changes threaten competitiveness and jobs. The conflict in Ukraine has intensified energy security controversies, with some calling for delays in coal phase outs to ensure supply stability, though the government has generally been adhering to its timeline. Perhaps most significant, climate policy continues to be subject to election policies, with one party or another championing alternative approaches to balancing environmental and economic requirements. The challenge is to maintain long-term policy consistency across changing political majorities, offset against legitimate stakeholder worries over transition impacts. Climate risk exposure. Despite its own adaptation measures, Germany is exposed to increasingly higher climate change impacts that test both society and economy. The country has already heated up by 2.3 degrees Celsius since 1881, above the global average, and has clear-cut effects in many areas. Weather events are increasingly costly, and flood events between 2002 and 2021 have cost around 80 billion euros, including the devastating 2021 floods that killed over 180 people. Crop yields are increasingly under threat from heat waves and drought, with some crops losing 15 to 25% of yields in poor weather years. Critical infrastructure like transport networks and energy systems are coming under more stress from intense weather, storms, and floods. Sensitive, exposed economic sectors are tourism, which is dependent on sound seasonality, agriculture, and logistics networks, in turn dependent on sound infrastructure. These increased climate risks are the reason why Germany's mitigation efforts, though impressive, must be complemented by high adaptation expenditures. The country's high population and industrialization make it particularly vulnerable to cascading impacts of infrastructure failure. Stakeholder interests and transition resistance. The shift into energy creates winners and losers, with several dominant vested interests placed at risk of severe economic dislocation. The coal industry, although smaller than historically, is still directly accountable for the employment of approximately 20,000 people in mining and electricity generation, with several more associated industries. These individuals and communities quite rightly oppose rapid phase-outs without adequate alternatives. Germany's gigantic automotive sector, is particularly vulnerable as the transition to electric vehicles threatens established suppliers of engine parts, transmission systems, and ancillary technology. Natural gas distributors have sunk significant amounts in infrastructure that will be stranded as a result of electrification and hydrogen use, reducing demand for gas. Energy consuming manufacturers are concerned at a higher cost of renewable power and carbon pricing will render them non-competitive on a worldwide basis, resulting in their export to foreign destinations. Most poignantly, perhaps, entire regions of fossil fuel based economics are under threat of underlying economic transformation, and they require inclusive, just transition plans and programs. Managing these vested interests requires policy craft, attention, delivering economic substitutes, and maintaining transition momentum. The government approach has variable impacts on impacted regions and workers with solid long-term indications of transition inevitability. Implementation prospects, strengths. Various parameters are responsible for the optimism about Germany's ability to achieve its climate targets. Most of all, there is excellent policy agreement on big potential parties across long-term climate goals, even if they disagree with specific implementation plans. Such accords deliver crucial policy stability to long-term investment. Germany has world-leading technological competence in clean energy efficiency and industrial processes, which will give it competitive advantages for clean technology development and rollout. The robust public finances and massive industrial investment opportunities of the nation constitute the fiscal foundation for enormous transition expenditures required. Robust institutional framework, including specialized organizations and coherent planning systems, promote effective policy coordination and enforcement. Not the least, high environmental consciousness and widespread backing for green policies provide favorable grounds for a durable political commitment. Germany's leadership in the use of renewable energy demonstrate these strengths. Germany has consistently exceeded installation targets and lowered technology prices globally. These are signals that Germany has the fundamental capabilities for decarbonization success, though there are basic challenges. Implementation prospects, challenges. There are considerable strengths in Germany, but severe implementation challenges can undermine target achievement. Industrial decarbonization has the largest timeline risk, as industries such as steel, cement, and chemicals need breakthrough technologies that won't scale commercially within available time horizons. Grid infrastructure is slowed systematically by complicated approval procedures, with some transmission lines taking more than a decade from planning to in-service operation. The renewable energy boom has generated skills shortages right across the economy, from specialized engineers to project managers, which can potentially limit installation rates. Global competition for critical minerals and renewable energy materials could raise prices and lead to supply bottlenecks, as numerous countries at the same time are making similar transitions. Most troublesome, perhaps, is the social acceptance is still enormous. Is still tenuous. Even as people broadly express support for climate action, with local communities frequently opposing particular wind farm or transmission line projects through protracted legal battles. These challenges mean that while technically Germany's goals are feasible, pragmatism may require additional time or alternative steps. Political leaders must weigh whether to pragmatically realign timetables or risk the wrath that arises from promises being overly aspirational. Comparative analysis. International comparisons both put a focus on Germany's leading role and also on the scale of global challenges. With renewables electricity reaching 62.7% in 2024, Germany significantly exceeds the EU average of 42% and the world average of 30%. evidencing the reality of rapid installation of renewables. Nevertheless, Germany's industrial emissions intensity remains above countries with nuclear and hydroelectric supported nations like France and Norway, while remaining below China and America. Germany's ambition on climate is one of the most ambitious globally, and its carbon neutral by 2045 target is several years ahead of even most other developed nations. Its proposed spend of 500 billion euros on the transition by 2030 is larger than comparable UK, which is 300 billion euros, and France, which is 200 billion euros schemes, but also bears witness to ambition and the challenge of reducing a big industrial economy. Public backing for climate action remains more robust than most countries, but is increasingly faced with skepticism about cost and implementation. These comparisons suggest that while German initiatives are pioneering, success will be contingent on international cooperation to respond to competitiveness challenges as well as supply chain limitations worldwide. Scenarios for 2030 and 2045. Adaptation management. One moment, please. Forward to 2030 and 2045, there are three scenarios that enclose the range of outcomes for Germany's climate transformation. The best case scenario assumes breakthrough technologies in process industries, sustained and high levels of investment, and simple social acceptance, making it possible for all official goals to be achieved on schedule. All of these occur simultaneously, in this case, not an easy but feasible one. The realistic case, given the current trends and lag in implementing standards, suggests hitting 70% emissions reductions by 2030 versus the target 65, with climatic neutrality by 2050 instead of 2045. This is assuming likely challenges in industrial decarbonization and infrastructure building, but still signifies meaningful improvement. The gloomy projection predicts a political backlash against transition costs and social resentment in the long term to paying for infrastructure, and forces of global competitiveness driving policy, backtracking, delaying climate neutrality beyond 2055 or even later. Wildcards like geopolitical shocks, tech revolutions, or climate tipping points could turn events dramatically in either directions. The important thing is that adaptive management, maintaining policy flexibility without sacrificing long-term ambition, may be more important than being rigidly bound by specific timeframes. Key findings and synthesis. This is a comprehensive analysis that brings out Germany as a paradigmatic case study of decarbonization of industrial economy with mixed results and valuable lessons. Germany has made excellent strides, reducing emissions by 46% relative to 1990 levels, while maintaining economic growth and recording record levels of renewable electricity. Strong policy structures with legally binding commitments and large-scale investment pipelines reflect serious transition momentum. Nevertheless, strong implementation challenges persist, notably over industrial decarbonization timetables and increasing social acceptance risk relating to cost and local effects. Germany's experience is of global relevance, as other industrial countries observe whether an accelerated decarbonization can be reconciled with economic competitiveness and social stability. Perhaps most importantly, Germany's strong institutions and technological prowess provide adaptive capacity to have the ability to change tack while maintaining long-term goals. The nation is a world in vitro laboratory to determine whether advanced economics can heroically make the transition climate science requires and maintain prosperity and democratic legitimacy. Policy recommendations. Based on this analysis, some of the policy recommendations would enhance Germany's transition efficiency. First, increased industrial assistance through more funding for innovation and technology research and deployment might address the most challenging decarbonization sectors. Second, strengthening social dialogue through higher public participation in energy infrastructure planning can increase local acceptance and lower implementation delay. Third, increased regional coordination through EU-wide carbon pricing strategies and competitiveness tools can address legitimate business concerns about regulatory disadvantages. Fourth, enhancing the flexibility of implementation by permitting sector-specific target adjustments while keeping overall emission caps intact could allow for more realistic attainment of climate objectives. Lastly, enormous investment in developing skills and training programs for employees is needed in order to avoid labor shortages from hampering transition velocity. These recommendations are conclusions based on Germany's experience and that ambition has to be balanced by pragmatism, that concerns of stakeholders have to be addressed without losing momentum, and that successful climate policy relies on technical solutions and social legitimacy. Conclusions. Germany is the world's most ambitious attempt to rapidly decarbonize an industrialized economy while remaining democratic and competitive. The country's 2045 goal of climate neutrality, supported by sectoral plans of detail and legislative requirement, is unprecedented political ambition. There is notable progress in historical renewable energy deployment and significant emission cuts in multiple sectors. However, implementation realities imply that industrial decarbonization timelines will prove demanding and social acceptance should not be taken for granted as costs become more transparent. Germany's experience is of universal relevance for other nations considering how to reconcile climate ambition with economic and social needs. The review is one of cautious optimism. The goals are technically feasible, and Germany has the institutional and technological abilities to achieve it. But flexibility in timing and policy adjustment could be required to sustain long-term momentum as well as to meet valid stakeholder issues. Germany's own transformation is ultimately both a source of inspiration and a warning for the world's climate issue. These are the references, and thank you very much, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.